I'm Scott Allen Miller, and on today's Sam IT, we're hanging out in the garden, and we're going to do a little practicum discussion on a very specific point. This is something that comes up on a semi-regular basis as a question that small business clients have a tendency to ask. And there's both a general case and a specific case. Today, we're going to talk about the specific case and touch on the generalities so that you can use this in both cases. But the very specific case that I hear about multiple times in the last, say, 8 weeks is people are interested in, can I use tools like Google Drive as a means of enabling multi-user access to applications like traditional QuickBooks? Not QuickBooks Online, that's already multi-user and taken care of for you, but traditional desktop QuickBooks. It's difficult because many people naturally would like to use it in disparate locations. We already have QuickBooks commonly used for multiple people within a office environment on a single LAN with shared access to a mapped drive or similar mechanism, and you're able to use that to enable multi-user using multiple copies of the QuickBooks application to access a single database so that multiple people can use it at once. That exists, but we often now, especially since the pandemic, so many more people work from home, so many people are more acutely aware of the options of being able to work in multiple locations. They want to extend that technology to allow people to work from home, for example, or work from a hotel. And we get some of those advantages using other tools. Why can't we do it with QuickBooks? And why can't Google Drive make that happen? Quick answer. Under no circumstances can you do that. That does not work. Now, let's answer why. Let's start with, why do people get the idea that you can do it? So a lot of people are going to use things like QuickBooks. This applies to a lot of applications, Avamark, Impromed, just anything, any of these really, 30-plus-year-old legacy 1980s style client server applications. They were still making them a little bit in the 90s. By the late 90s, this stuff was ridiculous and no one should have been making anything like this, but that's another topic. But that's why people are frustrated by these, is that we're trying to solve problems that were decades ago resolved and shouldn't be stuff we have to worry about today, but some of these applications are so ancient and legacy and have no accommodations for the modern world that we're stuck, and people get frustrated because of that. To be clear, in this specific case, Intuit does not recommend that you use QuickBooks. They have replaced QuickBooks long ago with QuickBooks Online that addresses all of these issues. It is a much more modern and better application in so many ways. And a lot of places will say, but I don't want to move. That's fine, but you have to accept the limitations that you are taking on. You're running a legacy application that was legacy 20, 25 years ago, and you're still running it today. You don't get to do that without any negatives. This is one of those big negatives. So the reason that a lot of people today get the feeling that they can do this, one, is they talk to the wrong people. They'll go to someone like an accountant who obviously has no formal or expected training as to how this works. So they don't know why it would work or why it wouldn't work. They just say, well, I want it to work, and they're not on the hook for your data integrity issues. I know it sounds like they should be, but when it comes to this is an IT issue. It is not an accounting issue. And so as long as you know not to take their advice, and they should know not to give it, right? They do take on a liability if they take that role on. If they start saying, no, use QuickBooks in that way, obviously they're claiming by giving that recommendation that they know IT, and they are taking on any professional liability that comes with that, and that could present a potential legal issue of professional negligence. As a accountant, to put forth that they have that IT knowledge is certainly something that their accountant hat should be responsible for. Just as if a lawyer gave this advice, they would certainly be legally liable for the losses that it creates. So there's that side, but also once they give a recommendation like this, they are taking on a role of being an IT recommender, and so they could be potentially liable in that way. An organization that asks an accountant for that advice is really asking for problems, because it's completely inappropriate, right? There's no reason to assume that they would understand that, and going to them and trying to get them to give you an answer is simply not an appropriate methodology, right? They're not trained for it. They aren't expected to have that knowledge. They would not reasonably have it. Like, none of that is stuff that makes sense for them. There's also a lot of liability from a why they might know that standpoint, or think that they know that. If they don't do their research, if they don't understand the mechanisms, what is often going to happen is that tools like this, whether Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever, iCloud, Nextcloud, there's so many out there, They are really great products to use with QuickBooks as an automatic backup mechanism, or as a backup and restore mechanism used to move accounting between different locations. Or if you're a single user environment, it actually will work almost all the time, like to the 6 nines of the time, to allow you to access from multiple locations without actually having to manually move the files around. So in single user or in backup type modes, these tools go together really, really well. And recently, meaning in like the last 3 years, QuickBooks has actually worked with Apple to integrate iCloud to ensure that it does this. But they also have a warning right on the page that says that you can do it for backups, that you can't do it for multi-user, but they don't dig into why. They expect, if you want to know why, because this is standard IT knowledge, right? Anyone who is in an IT advisory role should understand how this works, why it works, and you should be able to go to them and get this information. So this is not something that QuickBooks needs to document. This isn't something that Google Drive needs to document. It's like if you have a screw and a hammer. Hammers don't need to have documentation about selecting nails. Screws do not have to have documentation about selecting screwdrivers. You, as a user of those things, of those tools or those implements, are expected to know how they go together. If you don't, you need to hire a carpenter. It's general knowledge. So all of this is general knowledge, which is why it's a problem if someone is giving bad recommendations on it. It means they're ignoring standard, really baseline, simple knowledge that any real thought into how the mechanisms work would instantly say, whoa, they aren't safe. And if you aren't putting that thought in, giving a recommendation about it is really reckless. So, but because they see it in single user environments, or because they see it in backup environments, it is often simply extrapolated that those are not challenges. Those are super simple. A challenging environment like multi-user simultaneous access must just be fixed as well. And that is absolutely, positively, 100% not the case. So why? Okay, so how does this application work, or any of these applications work in the normal sense? You have multiple instances of the application. QuickBooks, in this instance, you have a single copy of the database file. There's no database server. That's key here. This is a client server. So that means there's a single file. Everybody accesses that file at the same time when you're multi-user. Single user, of course, is just like Word or Excel. But this is a kind of mimicking a database server, except it's all with just one file that is shared from a file server. So like mapped drives type stuff is how they're accessing it. When it's supposed to be used that way, it's easy. There's a single copy of the file, say 3 or 10, whatever. QuickBooks instances from around the network access that file at the same time. And when one of them is going to make a change to that file, it writes into that file into a specific spot to lock the file. All the others, if they're going to make a change, they check to see if that file is locked before they make that change. If it is locked, they wait. If it has been locked, but they haven't seen the change yet, they refresh before they make a change. So each of them, this makes it a little bit slow, but maybe not noticeably slow, it depends on how you're using it, allows them to safely know that they're seeing the current version of the data and that their change will be seen by others before they make the changes to the database as well. So that database file, while this is a risky process and it requires a lot of trust of those applications, it has a lot of security concerns, it essentially works. And we've been doing this for decades, so most of the technical difficulties with this have been worked out. It's still slow, it's still really silly, it's still incredibly limiting, but it fundamentally works in environments where it's meant to work. Where it doesn't work is once you need to use it over fragile, slow environments, such as the internet, or when you need to use it offline, such as when someone is in an airplane, or anything like that. The way that we think we're going to be able to do this is to take the same thing, but instead of sharing it over a map drive, we put it on Google Drive or whatever, and that it'll have the same effect. But that is not true. In the original example on the mapped drives, everybody's looking at the same copy of the data. That's easy. One change is seen by all at the same time. They may not be looking at the time that there's a change, but they know to check before they do anything, and that change will have been there. So if it exists, they will see it. There's no like, it's out there, but I don't have a way to see it yet. With a synced system like Google Drive, every instance of the application has its own individual, unique copy of the database that is not looking at a shared one. That means that I could make a change and another user could make a change. We could have 20 users all making changes at the same time. None of them being sent back to Google to be saved. Maybe some of them are, maybe some of them are not, but all of us have a locally locked copy of that file that is now open, is about to contain changes. We have no way to know that the others are writing because there's no shared file to see a lock inside of. So when we do this, now if you did this really, really slowly, there's some chance that a lock will sync through and release. So you could, in theory, you could orchestrate a demo and make it potentially work every so many times. It's not that it's impossible to ever work. It's that there's absolutely nothing that makes it reliable. The expectation is that you will lose data, but you won't lose data every time. It's not a guarantee you'll lose data at any given instance. It's like flipping a coin. You flip a coin enough, you're guaranteed to get a head, you're guaranteed to get a tail, but on any individual flip, it's 50-50, right? In this case, on any individual multi-user access of this nature, you have a 90% chance of getting some amount of data loss, but there's always a 10% chance it'll work. So you can always contrive an instance, show it working, and pretend that it's safe, even though logically we know it's not safe. That's not possible. And this is, again, this is standard knowledge. This is not specialty stuff, not training on something that's unique. It's simply showing how standard knowledge is applied to this very specific instance so that you can look it up and have this particular reference. Okay, so 20 users, we all make a change at the same time. We then save them more or less at the same time. It doesn't have to be at the exact same time. We save them over a period of time. Also, we don't manually save. The system saves when it feels like saving. It syncs when it feels like syncing. So there's a lot of variation in when we take an action to when that data gets to Google Drive's server somewhere off online. And that means that we don't know whose changes are going to get there first. We don't know whose are going to get there last. And then we have to trust that Google's going to either take the first change, and then does it overwrite as each change comes in? It doesn't know which one is supposed to be the priority. And does it simply ignore all of them? Does it send warnings to all of them and says, well, start over and try again? That's the best case scenario, is that it throws away all the changes and lets you decide what to do, but it doesn't necessarily know how to do that. You may get lucky and have that, but in general, it doesn't know how to sync, and so it's left guessing. And the best case scenario is that it accepts nobody's changes and makes everybody start over again. But that's not the likely one. The likely one is either the first one's going to go, or the second one, or the last one, or something like that. And then other people need to be aware you don't know what things you've lost and what things you haven't lost. And this is when you're all online, and it's simply what's called a race condition, in that the system is racing. You're all racing to be the one who gets your change in. But if you have people who are working offline, this could be more than a couple seconds that we're talking about. We could be talking about people who've been offline putting in financial transactions for a period of days, right? You're in a plane, you're working in a hotel, your internet was terrible, our power was out here this morning, you're stuck working on a laptop till the battery dies, and then you turn your laptop on a few days later when you think of it, and it goes to sync your financial records, and you realize that hundreds of other financial transactions have happened since you did all of those, and there's no way to merge them together. Google Drive or any synced mechanism like this cannot know how to apply those changes in that sort of way. A database works in this sort of shared database file works as a single file. It can't go through and do row locking. It can't go through and do row merges. It doesn't know how to do that. And these are financial transactions. Often one will depend on another, so that some are missing may change how others should have been applied. It doesn't know what to do with that. And in some cases, even the humans don't know what to do with that, even if they had all that data. So this creates a really big problem. And you can imagine how this would be if you did this all on paper. If you were all sitting around the room and you had one piece of paper and you were forced to pass it between people sitting at a table, yes, you could argue over who gets it next. You could, and if you were, not allowed to talk to each other, but could only put a note on the paper saying you were working or done, and people would grab it and check and give it back, whatever. You could see how you could make it work with a notepad, even if your mouths are duct taped shut. But if you had to do it remotely and you're each given your own notepad and had no way to see other people's notepads, but randomly, every so often, you'd be handed someone's notepad, but you didn't know if it was everyone's, and that's just how it worked. It's really easy to see that you would make notes on your notepad and not know where they go in conjunction to other people's notes and how they may apply when you bring them all together, and you don't know when you have them all. There's just so many unknowns. And so when you're doing something like this, where you have synced storage, you can't have multi-user. Now you're going to say, but Scott, I know that Google applications work this way. How do they do it? So they work a little bit differently. They are sharing some mechanisms, we're sure, with Google Drive. They're leveraging Google Drive, but they are applications that Google controls. at every stage of the way. They control the database on the back end, they control the locking, they control the remote instance of it, and they're able to implement things like row locking and such because they're controlling the entire mechanism. They also don't have to use the same mechanisms if they don't want to. They can do this via dedicated database servers and simply present them through the Google Drive mechanism to make it seem like it's Google Drive, or they can build those in so that they're sitting side by side. But because they're built to use Google Drive specifically, they're able to make that happen. If you went and made a QuickBooks replacement that was designed to use Google Drive specifically, or Nextcloud specifically, or iCloud specifically, and leveraged its APIs, and looked for locking, and waited for locking, and checked through the APIs to make sure that an update hadn't made it, you could, and refused to make changes unless they had registered as online and told you that if they were online, all your changes were going to be deleted. There's a lot of negatives go on and a lot of complication. But if you did all that, you could, in theory, make a system that could do this, right? It's not that it's completely impossible. It's impossible using the legacy style tools that we have. If we were starting with Google Drive or some other mechanism like that as the starting point for storage, had access to the APIs, which you normally do, could you then leverage that to make something that's kind of more advanced than this? Yes, absolutely. Would you want to in most cases? Not really. We have better mechanisms than that already that are just the standard way of making modern applications that in most cases deal with that far better. And that's modern database servers with modern applications that sit on top of those database servers and control all egress and ingress and handle web interfaces or even fat interfaces. They're going to talk to that, but you have far more data, far more control, have a more efficient mechanism, and have really finely detailed locking so that you're locking only what's necessary. There's lots of ways to tackle this, and Intuit has with QuickBooks Online, and Google has with Google Docs. But QuickBooks and applications like it, Avmark and ProMed, whatever, they do not tackle that in any way. They simply are trusting you're going to use map drives. They have no mechanisms, no accounting for those things. And if you put them on something like that, they have no idea that they're on something like that. And they will not account for it. They won't tell you that it's unsafe because they don't know. They will simply lose your data. So that is why it's very unsafe. So that is the complicated answer. Why can you not put traditional client-server applications with a shared database file onto any type of synced storage mechanism? Because there is no mechanism for safety. It's simply dangerous. It's just the way it works. And this is a limitation we have to live with. And that is why we have to write modern applications today and not keep using legacy ones, because there are limitations that will not go away. Thanks for joining me. Please remember to like and subscribe. Questions, comments, get down there below. And if you'd like to support the channel, I'm going to put up a link here and down below. You can buy me a coffee. That comes directly to me and helps out. And also, what is really helpful, I don't make as much money from this, but it's extremely helpful, is if you'd like to buy a copy of my book, Linux Administration Best Practices by Pact Publishing. That is me. That was a lot of work that I did in the time that I was not posting very much here on the channel. And that does a lot to support me and the channel as well. And as always, if you'd like to hire me, I am a consulting CIO. I help at every level, and my organization fills in IT gaps in organizations, whatever you need, whether it's help desk, engineering, CIO services, storage, database, all of those things. That's what we do. We're ntg.co. And we've been doing this for a quarter century. We would love to speak to your business about how we can assist you, or whether you simply want to hire me as a consultant to help with architecture or speaking to your management about topics like this. That's what we do. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.